We've been talking for a while now in this series about the mission of God, and we've been unpacking, I think, a variety of ideas that for some of you it's really kind of fresh thinking, and it's a new way of understanding who God is. Realizing that God is not off distant from us and removed and hiding himself while we're on this search for him, but realizing that God is a God who is engaged, God is a God who's pursuing us, that God is a God who literally is on mission and entering our world and actively participating. That's a new concept for some of us. And what we've been understanding in this series is just the beauty of God's mission isn't just focused on individual recognition of who he is. God isn't just saying, I want you to just recognize me for who I am, and that's good. But God literally, what we've been looking at, God literally engages us in his mission, which extends beyond just people believing him. The mission of God, and this is what we've been unpacking. If you haven't been here, this is what we've been talking about, that the mission of God is this human flourishing, that the renewal of all things would take place, that there would be meaning brought to how we work and how we play, and that the relationships that we live in would be the kind of healthy and whole relationships that we were created for, that the world would be characterized by love and by peace and by justice and by mercy, that truly things that are broken would be reassembled and put back together. That's the idea of renewal. The Jews use this word called shalom, this idea of peace, this surpassing peace. That's the mission of God. And what we've been talking about is something Grant alluded to a moment ago, and that's that when God rescues us, when we individually come into this acknowledgement of who he is through Christ, he doesn't just rescue us from something. It's not as if he just plucks us out of the ocean adrift, but God actually rescues us to something, and we become co-creators with him. We participate with God. Last week, we were looking in the book of Genesis at how even in the very beginning, when we see this narrative of the origins of humanity, we see that the early beginnings of this narrative include us co-creating with God, us being in a position where we're stewarding and carrying out, where God puts it on us and says, you're to manage, you're to shape, you're to move this thing forward. We also looked even at the end of the New Testament, and we've read the portions of the book of Revelation and saw that this idea of humanity and the earth moving in a particular direction towards God's design is something that was always intended. That's what we've been unpacking. And what's interesting about this is, and truly, if you just take a step back, I think when you understand that that's who God is and that's what he's doing, there's something that's just beautiful about it. When you realize just the dimensions and the depth of who God is and what he's doing, when you see it coming together, when in this orchestra of all of these different pieces suddenly start coming together to create this symphony, and there's something that's beautiful about it. There's something that's incredibly engaging. There's so much joy when you're able to look and say, actually, my hobbies and my passions and my unique abilities, they actually matter. And suddenly meaning is given to so many different parts of life that we don't just segment into spiritual and non-spiritual, but we see God moving. There's something that's beautiful about all of this. But there's also a question that I think begins to emerge. And a question that I think we have to wrestle with and make sure we're clear on, and it has to do with Jesus. Because we can actually look, we can open up the pages of the Bible and we can see all the things that God is doing and has done, and we can be captivated by this mission, and it can be so beautiful and so wonderful, and we can see all the great things. We can say, man, I would love to engage in creating the kind of communities and hope that God would hope. We can see all of it, but the question is, what does Jesus have to do with it? At some point, when we understand the mission of God, we have to resolve the question of Jesus. What does Jesus have to do with the mission of God? Is Jesus just simply the key in the lock that opens it all up and makes it possible? Can you engage the mission of God and really live irrespective of Jesus and who he is? Does Jesus demand some sort of answer? That's what eventually we have to resolve for ourselves. If we're going to understand the mission of God, then eventually we have to come to answering the question of Jesus. How does Jesus fit into this? How does Jesus fit? What does he even have to do with the mission of God? Why is he still important? Is he still important? There's a scene that we're going to look at, a circumstance or a story in the life of Jesus this morning that I think it helps unpack this question for us. And I think it's going to reveal some very remarkable things about Jesus himself. So if you have your Bible, I want you to turn to John chapter 13. John chapter 13, we're going to enter into a scene in the book of John. And we're actually going to be in John 13, and we're going to move to John 14. And if you don't have your Bible with you, don't panic, because the words will be on the screen. But we're going to walk through this, and I just want to say this. I said this last week, and occasionally I mention this. Sometimes I think it's important for us to remember that when the Bible was written, it wasn't written with chapters and verses. Those were put in there at some point for our convenience, not because it was intended to be read in sections. Truly, the book of John, and especially the narrative that we're looking at this morning, it flows together. And so we're going to be moving from 13 to 14, and you're going to see the nature of what's going on in this conversation. And it's a dramatic conversation. There's something that's happening in the story. There's a moment that we're being caught up in. It's like one of those times when the tension is its highest. And so we're entering into a situation that things are a little edgy with Jesus and the disciples. In fact, where we're going to pick up reading, Jesus has literally just confronted Judas, his betrayer, and Judas has just walked out the door. And so they're all sitting around the table. There's this awkward moment. Jesus says, Judas, you're going to betray me. And then now they're all left in the room. And this is what happens when they're left in the room. This is what happens when Judas walks out. The door closes behind him, and you see something remarkable. Now, I want you to remember that Jesus has just washed their feet. He's been showing them servant leadership. He's been revealing kind of the scandalous, upside-down nature of who he is. And so there's all of this dialogue, and now the door closes. And this is what we pick up in. Verse 31 of John chapter 13 says that when he had gone out, when he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified." So this incident with Judas walking out just initiated something. His betrayal initiates something. Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. He's referring to himself. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and glorify him at once. And then listen to verse 33. This is where it gets really, really tense. He says, little children, he's talking to his disciples, which I think is interesting, but he says, little children, yet a little while I'm with you. You will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so now I also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. So Judas is out of the room, and he says, guys, listen, I'm going to go somewhere, and where I'm going, you can't come with me. Like he's saying, I'm going to go someplace, and he's looking at his disciples, and he's saying, the place that I'm going is a place that you can't come with me. Like, I'm going somewhere that you can't go. Now, this is really important, and I'm going to come back to this idea. And it makes sense that in this moment, as Jesus says this to these disciples, there would be some tension in the room. There would be some trouble, because these are guys who they've left their families, they've left family businesses, they've left careers, they've built their life around being his follower. They've sacrificed time and energy. Their identity is wrapped up in being a Christ follower. And so when you've been living your life around a certain person, and that person says, hey, listen, I'm going somewhere and you can't come with me, that creates a little bit of anxiety, right? That creates a little bit of tension. It's like, you can imagine your mom or dad at like 13 years old saying, hey, I'm going to go somewhere and you can't come with me. You're like, well, wait, what are you talking about? I'm supposed to be with you. I'm your follower. That's this moment right here, right? Where is it that Jesus is going? Some people say, well, he's going to heaven. Well, if that's the case, if Jesus is talking about heaven in this passage, then we have an issue, because Jesus says, you can't go there with me. So if that's what Jesus is talking about here, then there's a problem, because then that means that none of us can go to heaven, which should that should be like a little shocker for us. Like Jesus says, I'm going somewhere, it's heaven, and you can't come with me. And everyone's like, oh, now there's anxiety, right? So obviously Jesus isn't talking about that. So what is Jesus talking about when he says, I'm going somewhere and you can't go with me? What's far more likely is that Jesus is looking at his disciples and he's saying, listen, there's a point in time that we are at now. We have arrived at this moment in time. We have reached this period in history when suddenly what I am supposed to do is something that nobody can do except for me. What I'm going to do is the one thing that I am here to do. This is the one thing that I can do, and you can't come with me. God is going to be glorified in this moment. That's what he was just talking about, was the Father being glorified and him glorifying the Father. Attention is going to be drawn to God and who he is and what he's doing. And he's saying, nobody can go there with me. I am about to suffer, and I'm about to die, and nobody can come do this with me. Like, this is a moment that is unique to me. I'm the only one. This is my unique calling. This is the cup of shame and suffering, and I have to drink this cup alone. Now, this is just kind of a prelude. Jesus says, where I'm going, you can't go. And here's what's fascinating. As soon as he gets done saying this, he goes on and he says, listen, you can't do this, but this is what you can do. Jesus is great about this, right? He says, hey, you can't come with me, but now that I'm leaving, here's what I want to tell you. And in verse 34, he continues and he says this. He says, a new commandment I give to you. Now, first I want to just say, this is really provocative language. For him to say a new commandment I'm giving you, he's actually using a word that associates in everybody's mind with Moses. Moses was the one that gave the commandments. Moses initiated this law of the 10 commandments, and now Jesus says, listen, there's a new commandment. So he uses provocative language. He should have their attention. He says, this is what you're supposed to do. You can't come with me, but here's my commandment for you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you're my disciples if you have love for one another. One of the funny things about this that you realize is that Jesus says this is a new commandment. This is a new idea. Like, this is brand new. Hey, how about this? How about you love each other? And they were like, what? This is a brand new idea. I love that sometimes we get to pull the curtain back and see that this was a new idea. There was a point in time when people that had faith in God, that wasn't something that resonated with them. This is a new commandment. Jesus says, love one another. And this probably should be a pretty big deal. Obviously, Jesus is using commandment, and he's proclaiming to them. He's saying, here's what you're supposed to do. He's demonstrated love for them by washing their feet. Just in the moments before this, he had taken off their sandals and wrapped a towel around his waist, and he had washed their grimy feet as a symbol of servant leadership. He'd been showing them all along what it looked like to love and care for one another. And so now he says, this is what I want you to do. I want you to love one another. Brand new idea. And they should be caught up in this moment. And unbelievably, what we see is that they're completely distracted. In fact, the Bible, when you read it, it's always great. I love that the authors of the Gospels are really great at including some of the less stellar moments of the disciples. The disciples have this reputation, I think, for just kind of being thick-skulled at times, like they just don't get it. And so here's this moment when Jesus says something. He says, hey, I'm going to be going somewhere you can't go, but even still, here's my commandment. Here's this thing that you should be caught up in. And Peter's like, wait, can we back up to that whole you're going to go somewhere that we can't go thing? This should be a big deal. This whole, you're going to love one another, this is how the world's going to know you, that whole thing. People are going to, Jesus is like, you guys realize people are going to quote that for a really long time. What I just said was really important. And Peter's like, wait, I know. Let's go back to the part A, where you said you're going someplace that we can't go. This is the equivalent. Imagine that a guy has a girlfriend, and imagine that guy goes to a jewelry store, and he buys a ring, and then he goes and stands before this girlfriend that he's been dating, and he holds, in his pocket this ring, and it's there, and he looks at her and he says, I want you to know I went to the jewelry store today, and I bought something for you, and I have a really important question. And before he can say question, she goes, what jewelry store did you go to? Easy, buzzkill. This is we're having a moment here, right? How'd you get there? Did you, the traffic on Grand has been horrible, right? Did you go downtown? Because downtown, how long did it take you? And man, the air conditioning in your car, were you hot? All of a sudden if that happened, if a guy was sitting there, he's like, I got the ring, and then she starts asking questions. First of all, I think his first thought would be, this is never going to work, right? And then he'd say, what are you doing? I'm going to ask you a really important question. That's the moment that we're having here. Jesus says something, and he goes, man, guys, I know that, I'm not going to be here, but here's this really big idea. And Peter's like, yeah, but wait. What did you say before you said the new commandment thing? Verse 36, Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Where are you going? Where are you going? Jesus is like, guys, stop it, right? And Jesus answered him, where I'm going, you cannot follow me now. And then listen to what he says, but you will follow afterward. So he actually says to Peter, it's going to be different for you. And Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. And ironically, Jesus says you won't do it now, but Peter is crucified upside down. He's martyred for his faith. But Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you've denied me 3 times. Now, this whole conversation that's going on, Jesus is literally, he's talking about his suffering. He's talking about his death. And Peter says, Lord, why can I not follow you now? I'll suffer for you. I'll do these things. And he says, listen, someday you're going to do that, but not now. This is unique to me. By the way, this parallels another conversation. James and John's mother came to Jesus at one point, and instead of Jesus saying, I'm going somewhere that you can't come, she came and she said, can my son sit at your left and right hand? And Jesus said, I'm going to drink a cup that they can't drink. There's a cup that's unique to me, and I have to drink of this. And now he's using a similar parallel illustration. He's saying, there's a place I have to go that you can't go. There's something unique about me. There's something unique about Jesus that makes him stand apart and different. Instead of saying, going where I go, Jesus said, cup that I drink. But either way, he's saying, there's something that's about to take place. Now, this is a really troubling statement. And if you think about this for these disciples, in this conversation, in the last hour or so, Jesus has confronted Judas. Judas has left. Now Jesus is talking in code. He's saying, I'm going to leave you. There's a place that you can't go. He's using all of this. At this point, if you were one of the disciples and you're in the room, this is the point in which you start imagining the wheels are coming off of this thing. This whole follow Jesus, be a disciple thing, this is falling apart. Guys are leaving, Jesus is leaving, what's going to happen? This is the moment when you would be the most anxious saying, what in the world is going on? The tension in the room would be so thick you could cut it, right? That's why what Jesus says next is so reassuring. So in John chapter 14, the conversation continues. You turn the page, and you see that Jesus says these things, and then he just says, let not your hearts be troubled. Hey, guys, don't worry. I understand this is stressful. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms, and if it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, that where I am, you may also be. Now, this is really interesting, but you can feel the flow of the conversation in this. You can feel this tension that's kind of rising in the room, and Jesus says, guys, listen, don't be troubled, don't be worried. He's saying, you can't accompany me down this path of suffering and death, but it's okay, because I'm preparing something for you. I'm preparing something for you. So love God. Keep your faith in God. Keep your faith in me. And I'm going to go along this journey and prepare something for you. Now, our assumption when we read this is to say, well, the Father's house, he's obviously talking about heaven. That's our first assumption. The interesting thing is that when you read the book of John, what you realize is John uses completely different vocabulary for the kingdom of God than the other writers of the Gospels. So the other writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, when they referred to the kingdom of God, they used the kingdom of God. With John, he uses life everlasting, life to the full. He talks about life in Jesus in completely different terms. He talks about it from a family perspective. And so in this reference here, Jesus is saying, I'm preparing something for you. And he uses this idea of Father's house. But essentially what Jesus is saying is there's something being prepared for you, something that you will be a part of, and it will make sense. There'll be a territory. There'll be a landing place. There's going to be a kingdom of sorts, and you will be there. There'll be a place for you, and you'll be welcomed there because of what I'm about to do. Remember, Jesus was always saying the kingdom of God is at hand. It's right here. It's right around the corner. I'm preparing this thing for you. And then Jesus returns to this earlier point, and he says, listen, you know in order for this to happen, I have to go do this. Now, Thomas is so much like Peter in the sense that he still isn't getting it. And so in verse 4, Jesus says, and you know the way to where I'm going. And then Thomas says to him, Lord, we do not know where you're going. How can we know the way? So first Jesus says, I'm going someplace you can't go. Okay. Now he says, but you know the way. And they say, what do you mean we know the way? We don't know the way. Where are you going? Like there's this confusion. There's utter confusion in this moment, right? What are you talking about? What is Thomas really asking here? What is he looking for here? That's the important question. When Thomas says, where are you going? We don't know the way. He's looking for something concrete. He's looking for something that he can hold on to. The disciples aren't asking theological questions at this moment. They aren't thinking about how people will resolve theological complexities 200 or 2,000 years from this point. They're actually thinking, what do we do next? Like, where do we go? Like, what do we do? Like, you're going to go to the cross and then this whole thing's going to happen. Then what do we do? Like, Lord, we're confused. That's what they're saying. We have no idea what you're talking about. We have no idea where to go. We have no idea this destination that you refer to. You're saying we can't go there. Then you're saying we're going to be there. Like this is, and something's going to happen. Like there's this confusion. And there's this frustration. And so Thomas isn't questioning because he wants to understand and categorize things. He's questioning literally out of frustration, and he wants something specific that he can hold on to. He wants to grasp to something. What do I hold on to? I understand what you're saying. You're leaving us, but what do I hold on to? And what Jesus says next is something that you might be familiar with. But the depth and the richness, when you understand it in the context of this conversation, is life-changing. It's mind-blowing. What do we hold on to? Where are we going? How do we get there? Verse 6, Jesus says to Thomas, I am the way. We don't know the way. Like, what do we do? I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Now, here's what's interesting. Despite what you may think, this is not an entrance exam to heaven that Jesus is giving them. He's comforting them. Pulled out of context, this can be an entrance exam, but that's not the context. When you see what Jesus was and is doing in this moment, you realize there's far more meaning to this. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He uses three very interesting words, three Greek words. He says, I am the way. I am the hodos is the Greek word. Literally, that word means the path. He is the path. He is the way himself. Thomas is saying, well, how do we get to where we're going? And Jesus says, no, it's not like some road that you're going to follow. It's me. I am the path. It's this idea. It's this Greek word that captures this image of a meandering, wandering path that you would follow and walk along. Jesus says, literally, I am the way. Now, this is a brand new idea. Again, it's a brand new idea for us. Because most of us think about life, and what we imagine in our heads is that there is a way that we're going in our life. We set the direction, the course, we have some guidance and a map in our hand, and then we come along at some point along the way, and we see Jesus, and we go, Jesus, I would love for you to join me, and we lock arms with him, and now we walk with Jesus along our way, and that's how most of us view the world, is that Jesus is along the way with us as we journey. Jesus is giving us a radical different idea, and he says, no, I'm not here to be along with you and show you the way. I am the way. It's me. I am the way. I am the way. I am the path. It is me that you follow. It's me. He uses this imagery that he's referred to over and over again as he preached sermons about narrow roads and wide roads and this idea of direction and people moving in certain ways. He says, it's me. You move in. You follow me. I am the way. And then he says, I am the truth. The aletheia is the word truth that he uses. The Greeks had different words for different things, and the word aletheia means a particular kind of truth. Aletheia means a truth that is stable no matter the circumstances around it. Jesus says, I am the aletheia. There is this sense that the aletheia retains objectivity, that no matter the circumstances that are happening, no matter the boiling water pot that's going on around, the truth is always stable. It does not change. This last week, while the kids were at camp, Sherry and I, we shipped off one of our other kids so that we could just have like some time, and some of you that had kids at camp, you know what I'm talking about. It's like that moment you just, right? I got lost in that moment in the last service. It took me like 10 minutes to come back, but so we had some time, just sharing. It was really good, and we went to the lake, and we have a sailboat that we share with somebody else, just an old little thing, and we have a little motor on it, it barely moves it, it's just like putts around the lake, and so we went over, and we're putzing around, and this friend of mine has an old family cabin on this one bay in Coeur d'Alene. So we just decided we're going to go further than we've ever gone in our sailboat, which isn't very far because we usually don't make it very far. And never mind, I won't go there. But we get going and we go around this cove, and I get the anchor out and I drop the anchor, and I'm just letting the line out, and then I feel the anchor kind of grab the bottom of the ground. And as it kind of draws tense on the boat swings, and I kind of stand there for a second, I'm like the master and commander, like of my ship just for a moment. I noticed like, okay, we're stable, everything's good, like we're set. And we really were. We're just like everything was perfect. And so then we got our noodles out, because that's what adults, they play with their kids, like big foam water noodles when they're not around. So we're like, let's jump in the lake. So we jump in the lake, and I jump in. I'm kind of sitting there on top of, I have a bigger one because I'm fatter, and so I'm sitting there on top of this noodle, and we're just kind of hanging out, and I'm talking, and she's like, is it cold? And I'm like, well, there's only one way to find out, So she jumps in, and now we're both sitting there on our noodles, and then all of a sudden she looks up, and she realizes like the boat is definitely changing position. She goes, and by the way, I asked her in the first service if I could tell this story, and she said no, but she's not in this service, so. Just kidding. After the service, I begged her. And but so we're sitting there, and she goes, the boat's moving. The boat's moving. I think the boat's moving. And I'm like, no. And she goes, no, definitely. Like, we're getting further and further apart. And I just kind of laughed, and I said, Are you being serious? And she goes, yeah, I don't think the anchor's holding. I'm like, wait. So there's this massive boat, and there's an anchor with this really tight line that's buried in the bottom of the lake. And then there's these two individuals sitting on floaties, just kind of bobbing in the water, and you think that the boat's moving? I think it's us that's moving, So then she realizes, like, we're being blown by the wind, right? We're being kind of tossed around by the waves. Like, we're the ones that are moving, not the boat, which is interesting that James uses that sort of analogy, that we get blown and tossed by the wind, right? He talks about that and uses that type of phraseology, right? Because we have this tendency in life to bob around, to float around, and the aletheia is a truth that is anchored. The aletheia is a truth that no matter how it feels that things are moving, that things are shifting, that truth isn't what it used to be, the reality of the aletheia, the truth that Jesus references in himself, is that truth never changes. That truth is always anchored. It's always the stable thing. Jesus says, I am the path, and I am the one stable truth. I am the one stable reality. And then he says, I am the Zoe. I am the life. The word Zoe in Greek is a different kind of life. It isn't just like heart beating, thumping, lungs, exasperating air. That's not what the word Zoe encompasses. The word Zoe literally means life to the full. It's the idea of being fully animated, fully alive, firing on all 8 cylinders. Life is everything that it's supposed to be. Jesus says in this single moment, he says, I am what gives you animation. I am what fills you with life. I am what makes you feel truly alive, not just breathing. He looks at these guys who live in a culture like our culture, a culture filled with people who have tried to animate themselves by running from entertainment to object to possession to career, to power, to all of these things. And he says, those things are all fleeting. It's only until you come to me that you experience the fullness. You experience life to the full. I am the Hodos. I am the Aletheia. I am the Zoe. You find this in me. That's what Jesus says. You don't need new information. You don't need more, Thomas. You need me. You simply need to trust me. Don't look for a way apart from me. Don't look for a truth other than me. Don't look for a life in anything but me. That's what he's saying is, I know you're insecure, but you know the way. Why? Because you know me. I'm going someplace that you can't go. Well, then you're going to come there. And when you come there, you'll come there because you know the way. You know the way. You know Jesus. That's what he's saying. I've spoken to you of the truth. I've spoken to you of the life. I've spoken to you about how to live. Don't you realize this? That's what he says. Jesus looks at Thomas saying, how can we know? And he goes, you already do. You already do. You already do. There isn't a new technique. There isn't a new trick. It's me. It's not just knowing about me. It's actually knowing me. I love that in the middle of this conversation, Jesus starts it by saying, hey, don't be troubled. And why does he say this? Because what we're seeing, this uncertainty in the disciples, it's the uncertainty that we feel when we begin to step out in faith and we stop trusting other things for life. It's the uncertainty that we feel when we suddenly relinquish our game plan and we begin to truly follow Jesus. It's that nervousness of faith that says, I really am going to break with this roadmap that I had for my life. I'm really going to follow Jesus. It's the nervousness that comes when you find yourself grasping for something that matters and you say, I don't understand everything. I just understand Jesus, and you hold on to him. He understands the troubled nature of our souls when we truly trust and follow him. And so he says, don't be troubled. I know that TVs and celebrities and people around you, their life may look radically different, and you're going to question and you're going to wonder, and there's going to be times when your faith is challenged, and he says, don't be troubled. Just trust, to believe. Bring it back to me. Bring it back to me. It's like, come back and remember that it's me. And you would think at this moment that the disciples would have a clue. And maybe 10 of the 11 that are left standing there do, but Philip doesn't. And so Philip continues in this theme of worry and misunderstanding. And in verse 8, listen to what he says. So Jesus just lays this out for him, and he goes, Lord, show us the Father, and it's enough for us. Can you just give us one more thing? But the one more thing that Jesus does in verse 9 is the critical moment in this dialogue. It's the critical moment as it relates to the mission of God and understanding Jesus' place in it. Because in verse 9, Jesus responds to Philip and says, have I been with you so long and you still don't know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. Believe me that I'm in the Father and the Father is in me, or else believe on account of the works themselves. Jesus says, man, you've looked at me. And by the way, if you ever wrestle with the claims of Jesus, you ever question whether or not you should believe Jesus or whether or not you just want to accept Jesus as some sort of misunderstood rabbi, the reality is it's moments like this that you look at that demand you to resolve what Jesus says about himself. He says something radical in this moment. He says, if you look at me, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. You've seen God himself. Jesus says it's me. You've watched me. This is the core of everything that Jesus is talking about. Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. You've seen me. The invisible God has been made visible in front of you. That's what you have seen. The Father in me. If you want to know what God is like, if you want to know what God cares about, if you want to know what God's mission looks like, if you want to know how a life is lived according to that mission, if you want to see what it looks like to love people, if you want to see what it looks like to prioritize your values, if you want to see what it looks like to live out God's purposes, Jesus says, if you want to see God and who He is, look at me. If you want to understand the mission of God, look at me. Look at my life. Look at my character. Look at my way. Look at the way that when there was an adulterous woman that was brought before religious leaders and about to be stoned, I intervened and came down and loved and cared for her and sent her on her way and healed her. Look at the way that I came to a man that was born blind and healed him and disrupted the society and brought cultural shift and change. He says, look at me. Look at me when I sat on the well with a Samaritan woman and I told her things that she couldn't imagine that I knew about her, and I liberated her and brought her new life. Look at me. You want to see the Father in His heart? Look at me, He says. Look at me when I reach out and I touch somebody. I put my hand there, even though that leper, that prostitute, that drug addict, look at me when my hand went out and touched and reached out and cared. That is the hand of your Father. That's the mission of God. Jesus says, look at me. You want to know the Father? Look at me. How am I living my life? That's what this looks like. And then, in verse 12, He invites us in. He says, truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do. And greater works than these will he do, because I'm going to the Father. And he's going to get onto something here in just a second, but do you realize what he's saying here? He's saying, listen, if you want to live the mission of God, you don't just invite Jesus to join you on your path. Jesus is the path. You follow Him. He is the way. You engage fully. He says, if you want to live the mission, you live out this life of touching the unclean, of caring for the people that are broken, of opening the eyes of the spiritually blind, of caring and creating love and peace and shalom, of disrupting social systems when necessary. You do these things. Truly, truly, I say to you that those who do these things. He goes on and he says, listen, I'm going to the Father, and whatever you ask in my name, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask anything in my name, I'll do it. He says, engage this mission with me. I'm your advocate. And then he doesn't just leave it there. And what Jesus unpacks next is, I think, in our two-dimensional Western culture, one of the most overlooked realities of what it means to follow Jesus. The spiritual dimension of who we are in the world that we live in. Jesus opens up our eyes to this. And he says, not only do I want you to engage, not only do I want you to live this out with me, but then in verse 15 he says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. You're going to do this. And when you do, I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever. Even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. In this moment, what Jesus is saying is that he will give us the Spirit of God. And as difficult as that to receive is with our Western minds and our two-dimensional thinking and our touch, taste, reality, things that we can feel and see and observe on our own, our empirical evidence, what Jesus is unpacking is a spiritual dynamic. And he says, as you carry this out, I will give you my Spirit, and he will be alongside of you, with you, filling you, strengthening you, giving you the ability to live this way, to believe this truth. That's what he says. So many times, we think about the Spirit of God in reference to an impactful time of worship. Like we get inside four walls of a church building and the Spirit moves and people worship their guts out and they swing from chandeliers and the paint drips off the walls and you go, man, God's Spirit was really moving today. It was crazy, yeah. The reality is you look at the New Testament and you see Jesus gives his Spirit so that we can carry out the mission of God. 90% of the examples that we have in the New Testament of people literally being filled with the Spirit and being in a moment in which they receive this is in the context of people living out the mission. It's people who need words to say and suddenly say them. It's people who need prayers that need to be prayed and they pray them and there's healing. It's people who are exhausted and need energy and they're suddenly given the ability. It's people who are encouraged, people who find peace in the middle of dark times. It's people who are living out the mission of God. That is the intersection of God's Spirit and humanity. Not simply so that we can just say, man, that was really good. I feel good about myself. Jesus gives his Spirit so that we can carry out his commandment to love one another. Which I don't know about you, but I need a little bit of help loving people sometimes. Because it doesn't always come natural. Because Grant can be a jerk. You know what I mean? Not about Grant, but you know what I mean. What do we see in this? Last night, lost a couple of friends this last 2 weeks. And memorial service today for one of them that Grant was talking about, and lost another friend last week. And I was at his memorial barbecue last night. And God has a sense of humor because we're up on the north side, and that storm that moved in last night, I don't know if anyone experienced the effects of that. If anyone lives on the north side of town, you experienced more of it. So we're outside, and all of a sudden, I look up, and I said, this isn't good. This is about to get really bad. And I was there with a friend of mine who's pretty ill. He's been ill for quite a while, and so his wife looked at Sherry and I, and they said, hey, can you get him out of here and take him to his mom's house, because he tends to get worn out and not do real well. And so I said, yeah, for sure. And so we're kind of batting down the hatches. We're taking all the awnings and everything down. We're kind of scrambling. Then I grab my friend Paul, and we get in my car. And so the storm's blowing in. And by the way, it rained because I washed my car for the first time in 3 weeks. So, and I checked the forecast. So we get in my car. My car's a convertible, soft top, right? So we're driving, and we're on the north side. And you didn't experience this if you don't live up there. It was Sherry literally started tapping her heels. She was like, there's no place like home, because the winds were swirling and things were going crazy, and literally trees were just tumbling everywhere. I mean, across division, there were massive branches, and we're driving, and my friend Paul, we're driving the car, he looks at me and he giggles, and he goes, I don't think this roof is going to do much if a tree falls on us. And I said, I know, I just got to drive faster. And so we're just literally, it felt like Armageddon. It was like an apocalyptic moment with fire trucks and people pulled over, and it was the power's out of all the lights, and there's all this craziness, right? And we go around by his mom's house, and we're driving around the corner, and literally neighbors are out in the yard because multiple trees have fallen into houses. Totally ridiculous, right? And so we drop him off, we hang out, chase the dog that got out, did all that stuff, typical storm, kind of crazy. And then after a little bit, we got in the car and we started driving south. And as we're driving south, all the fire trucks and all the police cars and everybody's just bombing north. And we're driving, and we just notice it's getting less and less dramatic the further south we go, because this is God's country, but that's a whole other thing. And we finally got home last night, and when we got home, literally, I'm not joking, we have a big pine tree across the street from our house. There were 2 sticks that big that were laying in our driveway. And I was like, there's seems to be that maybe there was a storm here. Right? But I had sat in the epicenter of this storm. I had sat in the middle of it. I saw it. It was swirling around me. And what Jesus is saying regarding the mission of God is that he is the epicenter. He is the epicenter. Jesus is the epicenter of the mission of God. Everything that God is accomplishing in the world happens in and through him. And you may see the effects of the storm here or there, but if you really want to experience the mission of God is experienced when you realize that Jesus is the way. Jesus is the truth, the anchor. Jesus is who animates you. Which means for us, there's all kinds of question about the way that we're following. Have we invited Jesus just to walk alongside of us for this roadmap that we've laid out before ourselves, aimed towards golf and a great retirement, and come along, Jesus, while I go get my degree and get a good job and buy a house? Come along, Jesus. It begs the question, is that what it looks like for Jesus to be the way? For Jesus to be the truth? When the world starts shifting around and everything's moving and you feel like things are changing, I've got questions. Do you question the truth? Do you question the reality of who Jesus is? Or do you say to yourself, no, he's the one thing. Jesus is the one thing that I'm sure of. And I may be drifting and I may be floating and my life may be bobbing away from the boat. But I know it's not Jesus that's shifting and changing. Does your life, does it look like that? Do you grab a hold of him? Is your life animated by him? When you're depressed, when you're down, when you need to pick me up, when you suddenly feel like there's not a lot of purpose to your life, what do you run to? What do you run to? Who do you run to? What do you run to? In order to feel alive, do you run to Jesus? Because Jesus says, I'm the Zoe, I'm the life. For some of you, that may be a radically new way to think about Jesus. And I encourage you, if that's how you're seeing him for the first time, Jesus says the same thing to you that he said to his disciples. Join me in this. Come to life. And if you've heard it before, and you're like me, there might be some of you that go, I got to swim back to the boat.